Welcome, everybody, to the show, the Winning Momentum podcast. Did you all have a good summer? Everybody ready to go back to work? Ready for another season of the Winning Momentum podcast? I am Scott Sinclair, your host. There were so many stories to choose from this summer. So many interesting stories that maybe are relevant to some of the content that we try to work at here to improve our business, to improve our life, to improve our framing of the world. And one of those stories that I selected for today, although there was a long list, one of the stories I selected for today that I thought was interesting, we could draw some lessons from, was Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson and his battle with the College of Psychologists of Ontario, which I know doesn't sound like something we can take business lessons from, but it is. And we're going to get ourselves there today to try to reinforce some of our points from a fellow in Jordan Peterson who is a global expert at getting attention and selling product, right? So it's an interesting story, I think. Now, before we start, I have a confession. I've always been a big Jordan Peterson fan, maybe not so much the last year and a half, 2 years, but back from the beginning of him putting his University of Toronto lectures on YouTube, lectures about psychology, about the meaning of biblical stories, how they're archetypals. Is that the right word? I think that's the right word. Stories on how humanity operates, the source code for us. And his 12 rules for life book. I've taken many of those lessons. And first of all, I just enjoyed listening to them. He's very engaging and intelligent. And I have taken many of those lessons and applied them in my turnaround work. For those that are new to the show, I am a professional investor and turnaround artist in business. So I jump into businesses. I might consult to them. I might advise them. I might step in as an interim executive. I might buy them or invest in them or lend to them, but help to affect change in an organization so that it better meets its goals. And there is a parallel in the lessons and the teachings of the old Jordan Peterson to the work that I do. And so that was how I first got onto Jordan Peterson's content, and it's been great for me. And I've been a big fan ever since, except in the last year and a half, 2 years, when Peterson has really become more political and frankly more angry. I'm just not into the angry tweets and the angry tweets and the politics and the anti-this and the anti-that. I'm not saying he's wrong at all. I'm just saying I don't have time for that. In my day, I try to focus on positive things going forward. But in the early days, full disclosure, I was a big fan. So big news over the summer and continues right now as recently as today in the National Post in Canada, which is, I don't know what to compare that to, probably the Wall Street Journal. In the U.S., there was a op-ed by Conrad Black on this issue and how we all need to support Jordan Peterson in his battle against the clamping down of free speech by the government. But the big news, and so this is an ongoing fight, and it's very current, is my point. And the big news is that Jordan Peterson is fighting with his professional regulator, the College of Psychologists of Ontario. So if you don't know, Jordan Peterson is a registered clinician. I believe that's the right term. He's a psychologist. He had a practice. He talks about that often in his content. Now, he stopped practicing, maintained his license, of course, but stopped practicing when he became an international success. He's on the road all the time, couldn't service his patients/clients, whatever the right word is for those. And recently, I believe it's about a year ago, the college, the regulatory body of which he is a member, investigated several complaints about Peterson's tweets on politics, on social issues, on transgenderism. And those tweets came from the public at large. There was no clients of Jordan Peterson that complained about these tweets, but just in general, the public sent complaints to the regulatory body. This is, so what's the word that I'm looking for? It's just so common. It's common with regulatory bodies. I'm a member of the Institute of Professional Chartered Accountants, or Chartered Accountants. We changed the name a couple years ago. So I'm a CPA in Ontario, Canada, is my local institute. And it's called an institute, not a college, but it's the same sort of thing. And like other public institutions, the College of Psychologists, that would include accountants, but such as hospitals, public schools, regulatory colleges, all of them, probably the Bar Society, although I don't know that one so much for lawyers, but all of them exist because of government driven law or regulation of some sort to regulate the members within that profession. Okay, so that's kind of the way that it works. I don't know if I explained that in an awesome fashion, but that's what the College of Psychologists of Ontario do. Is if you want to be in psychology, a practicing clinician in psychology, and hold yourself out to be a psychologist in Ontario, one would assume that you need to be a member of this. Certainly, if you want to be an accountant in Ontario, you need to be a member of the Institute of CPAs, okay? And so what do these institutes, colleges do? They're responsible for, certainly in the accountants, they're responsible for education, accreditation, creating codes of conduct, and enforcing violations of those codes of conduct is a major part of what a college or an institute would do. And again, they get that right by power of government, typically in my experience, through legislation. So these tweets were sent to the college as a complaint that, one of your members is doing something terrible. And again, when you get into battles with people, as a CPA, I've had, I think, twice in my life, in my career of over 30 years, I've been reviewed by the Institute. And both times there was nothing that came out of it. I was in the clear. But it's not a happy process. You have to go through this. You have to apply, provide a bunch of documents. Maybe there's an investigator that's reviewing everything. And I don't know how often accountants, for example, end up in front of their regulatory body, their membership body for codes of conduct, complaints, or what have you. But I guess if I had to guess, I would say that many, many accountants go through life and never have a complaint about them. But I am front and center in numerous battles. I work with troubled businesses, which means there's litigation. It means there's going to be people unhappy with decisions because you have scarcity of resources. And that's just the nature of the beast. And very often, people that are not happy with decisions and the way things go down, or disgruntled employees, whatever, they send in a complaint to the regulatory body, in my case, to the Institute for Accountants. And so I've been through that twice. And as I said, nothing came out of it either time. And, which I'm very thankful for, but I have some experience in this, is the point. And so it's no shock to me whatsoever that Jordan Peterson, as a member of a similar entity, would have tweets out that offend some people, and that the reaction of some of those people, whether coordinated or not, would be to file a complaint with the college. So after its review, the college concluded that Peterson's tweets pose moderate risk to the public, and includes the potential of, quote, undermining public trust in the profession of psychology and trust in the college's ability to regulate the profession in the public interest, end quote. And that kind of is just the heart of it for me. It's really simple. The panel said it recognizes that Peterson has a constitutional right to freedom of expression, but as a member of the college, it said that Peterson is obliged to maintain its professional standards, right? So we're not saying you don't have the right to free speech. We're saying that our job is to look after the professional standards of psychologists in Ontario, and you agreed when you joined our college to abide by that code of conduct. And so the college ordered Peterson to complete a specified continuing education or remedial program to address issues regarding professionalism in public statements. Now, as Peterson said, he said, tweet to clarify, It's been decided I either submit to social media communication retraining or face a disciplinary hearing and possible suspension of my clinical license and the right to represent myself as a psychologist. That's absolutely true. That's exactly the choice that he has faced. So, not happy with that, Peterson appealed the ruling in court. In his court application for a judicial review of the college's ruling, argued that the college's disciplinary measures were unreasonable and unduly infringe upon his free expression in contravention of his charter rights. Peterson's public statements do not relate to the practice of psychology. They were not political in nature, and they fall within the core of protected speech. Now, his argument here is that the college itself exists because of the will of the government, right? They pass some legislation. They say, yeah, psychologists can exist in this jurisdiction, and they can be regulated by this college. And the college answers to us, the government. All right, that's kind of his argument. So he's saying, one step removed is the government infringing on my free speech because they don't like what I say, because I'm on the other side of the political spectrum of the woke government. That would, in a sense, summary, be his argument. So, of course, he went to court and he lost on this, and the court didn't rule on free speech at all. What they ruled on, what they focused on, was whether or not the regulator had a right to restrict Peterson's freedom of speech outside of a clinical practice. And the answer, in my view, dead simple, would have been yes. I mean, that's the entire point of the college, is to protect the reputation of psychologists. So what were the tweets? Let's get interested in what he had to say. First of all, the complaints were centered on tweets Peterson made about COVID and health restrictions. And, of course, he would have been against the government position on harsh lockdowns and forced mandates for vaccination, notwithstanding any of the, revisionist history on the severity of these rules. But he was against that and appeared on Joe Rogan Experience. I'm not sure what the content was there, but, anybody anti-COVID restrictions on Joe Rogan is going to get a bunch of feedback. Pushback, I guess, is the right word for that. And so the panel followed up on concerns examined in other tweets. For example, he referred to Catherine McKenney, an Ottawa city councillor who prefers to use they, them pronouns, as, quote, appalling, self-righteous, moralizing thing, end quote. A tweet in which he used the dead name of actor Elliot Page, stating, remember when pride was a sin? Ellen Page just had her breasts removed by a criminal physician, end quote. A tweet in which he referred to Gerald Butts, the former principal secretary of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as a quote-unquote prick. He's right about that one, by the way. Gerald Butts is a prick. His tweet in response to a Sports Illustrated swimsuit cover of a plus-size model in which he said, quote, sorry, not beautiful, and no amount of authoritarian tolerance is going to change that, end quote. By the way, I picked these quotes up from the CBC in Canada, the government-sponsored or government-owned news agencies, so the state media, very left-leaning. Don't ban my channel for reading what the CBC is telling you. Peterson said his battle with the college isn't just about him, but the idea that a regulatory body backed by the government can try and silence someone by threatening their livelihood. When he was asked whether the college had any role in policing speech, even speech that may, for example, be clearly racist, we didn't see any of those tweets, but that was part of the accusation, as always. He said, if you grant a board the right to bully speech outside the narrow purview of professional interactions with clients, then you open the door to ideological capture of the colleges. Which of those is a bigger danger? It's not obvious. That's his point of view. He framed this as the government versus a free speech issue, and he did not frame it as the board's need to protect the profession's reputation. And he gathered, tremendous support. This became a global debate. It still is a global debate, a global issue. Newt Gingrich in the U.S. said the attack on Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson has become the perfect model for the threat of totalitarian mind and speech control. When he lost the court case, Jordan Peterson tweeted that the Trudeau-appointed judge who ruled against my appeal, read the Ontario College of Psychologists, is, surprise, surprise, an advocate of progressive DEI policies and tried to impose them on the Law Society of Ontario. That being the judge tried to impose them on the Law Society of Ontario. So what should we make of all this? Are you buying that this is the government clamping down on free speech through these regulatory bodies of various professions? Or is it simply a board of people at the psychologists' college looking to protect their members' reputation in their view? Imagine, maybe it's because I'm a professional, I see it as not a free speech issue. Imagine but that's not the lesson we're going to learn today. It's much bigger than exciting than that. But just on this issue, imagine you are on the direct issue. Imagine that you're a young adult wrapped up in activism, transgenderism, transition issues. You're lost. You're fragile. You have mental health issues. A lot of these things, I think, are wrapped up together. And the psychologist you get assigned is this guy who is angry tweeting about the issues that are driving or are a symptom of your mental issues, right? So you either have mental issues as a symptom of your activism and the things that you believe, or it's the mental issues that, in fact, have created these beliefs and this way of thinking. It's one or the other, but there's no such thing as activists and kids and young adults going through transition that are happy, right? This is not a happy time for anybody, so they're fragile. That's the point. Are Jordan Peterson's tweets going to help you, or are they going to hurt you and make you feel worse? And what if you end up, when you want to go see a psychologist, you end up with Jordan Peterson as your psychologist? I know he's not practicing right now, but you end up with him as your psychologist, and you know that this guy's been angry tweeting about all of the things that you're going through and how you're not a good person as a result. To me, that's a real problem. That's a real problem for someone who holds a license to be a practicing clinician in the field of psychology, specifically dealing with these sorts of issues. To which Peterson would reply, I'm not practicing, I have free speech, right? So he would say in response to that, okay, maybe, but I'm not even practicing and I have free speech, and that trumps that concern, but not to the college. Not to the people who sit on that board and review things. Their job is to look after the reputation of that particular institute. I, as I told you before, am an accountant and a member of that particular institute. And in our institute, we have a whole handbook of code of conduct regarding what it means, all of it related to what it means to be a professional. How do you behave? What are the things you're allowed to do? What are the things that you're not allowed to do, right? And all of it basically relates to protecting the reputation of the profession. Sure, it also relates to protecting your client. Don't lie. Don't screw your client for fees. Don't do false tax returns for your client as an accountant. But not really because of the client, more to protect the reputation of all of the other members of the institute, of all of the other accountants. It's an easy way to think about that. It's all about protecting reputation of accountants. And by the way, it's been really, really successful. I think the accountants in general have always had a really strong reputation as a result of these severe codes of conduct. It even includes a blanket statement that you can't do anything to damage the reputation of the profession. It's just a blanket statement, right? I'll give you an example. You can't say, it's against the rules, you can't say publicly that, and if you're an accountant, you can't say that another accountant is a crook, did something unethical, even that they're just so wrong that it's egregious, they're not professional. You're not allowed to say that out in public because it would damage the reputation of the profession. Yet, you have a positive obligation to report that thinking to the institute itself. In other words, you have to rat out your fellow accountant, and that, again, because it protects the reputation, so that somebody can investigate this person that you think is unethical. So it's all about protecting the reputation. I'm certain the College of Psychologists is the same, and Peterson would know this because Peterson is a professional. This is what it means to be a professional. So if he knows it, why the public battle? Why the public battle, including yesterday's op-ed from Peterson himself in the National Post, talking about free speech? He knows that this is not the issue because he's a professional. So what the hell is going on here? What lessons can we draw from this that we can apply to our career, to our brands, to building our business, to dealing with crisis, someone trying to cancel us? Are there lessons in here? Now that I've spent 20 minutes setting the table here and the battle, I think there's some really important lessons. Let's dive into those. First rule of persuasion is what? I'm waiting. The first rule of persuasion is attention. If no one's paying attention to you, you can't persuade them. Persuasion is sales. You're trying to persuade somebody to your point of view. You're trying to persuade somebody to buy your product, to take your service. Persuasion, in a sense, is sales. And the first rule is, if nobody's ever heard of you, if nobody's listening to your message, you're not going to persuade them of anything, right? So the first rule of persuasion is attention. What is the best way to get attention? Well, one of the best ways is to not be boring. You can't be boring because no one's going to listen to you. And I, for example, I don't know that I've overcome that. I hope that I have. I have to tell you something. In my profession, where I came up as an accountant and in finance and in investment banking, I'm a pretty rogue individual compared to my peers, right? I speak my mind. I'm kind of blunt. I'm not always eloquent. I'm not boring. I constantly get feedback about how I'm a unique person within my specific industry. But in the world at large, if I can compare myself to a Peterson or whomever, I'm pretty damn boring in that sense. And I fight every day to overcome that every day in my content, because you can't bore people to death and expect to persuade them or help them or sell them, right? Elon Musk has always said that the cardinal sin is to be boring. You can't be boring. He's not very boring. Everything he does is interesting and entertaining, which is why he doesn't have a marketing department in any of his companies. It's all him because he's figured out how to not be boring, okay? So one of the ways to get attention is to not be boring. Do you know what's really, really, really boring? Professionalism. Being a professional means being boring by definition. You can't be offensive. You can't be offensive to the world at large. You have to be vanilla. You have to be in the middle. You can't be entertaining, right? And hold a professional designation of some sort because it detracts from the gravity of the profession. You know, professional organizations are always at the leading edge of trends, what we would call in this world woke trends, the green trend, DEI. Why? Because all of it is designed to protect the brand of the professional as reputable, as trustworthy, and as a professional, you become associated with that, and your job is to protect that, which means you have to be boring, which means it's hard to get attention. Okay. But Peterson, Jordan Peterson, as we know, is a master at gaining attention, right? He came to fame when he was a professor at University of Toronto, when the Canadian government passed laws regulating speech. You couldn't say hate speech. It would be, you could go to jail for calling somebody the wrong pronoun, in Peterson's opinion. And so he came to fame by fighting that and getting a bunch of attention. And he's an amazing storyteller. He was an early adopter of YouTube, posting his UT lectures on there. And he's had billions of views on YouTube of his content, billions and billions of views. He has 4.6 million followers on X, which is the new name for Twitter. He sold over 10 million English language copies of his first book, not his first book actually, but his popular book, 12 Rules for Life. As a professor, he's now worth tens and tens of millions of dollars, probably a lot more than that. He's respected by the world's smartest scientists and philosophers, right? He's a foremost global intellectual in his area, which, by the way, it doesn't mean that there aren't smarter people in the world, that he's the smartest fellow going. It means that when you think of who is a global intellectual in these particular areas, you think of the name Jordan Peterson, because he has the energy. He has the attention. Peterson is an energy monster. He's an attention monster. That's how he became Jordan Peterson. So if you're in the business of getting attention, and all of us that are in business are in the business of getting attention, how could you sell anything if you don't have the attention of your target market? We're all in the business of getting attention, and you have this. If you're in that business and you have the substance, you have the wealth, you have the market position, that you're not worried about your downside on this particular decision, and it happens that a professional body investigates you and comes down with a ruling, what should you do about that? Should you quietly say, okay, and do the virtual training on social media posts for a week and be done with the whole thing? That would have been an easy decision. Peterson could have said, okay, maybe you're right. Maybe I should take the training. He could have gone into the virtual training. It wouldn't have taken more than a week or two out of his life, and that would have been that. And then he could have ignored the whole thing until the next time, right? There was an option if that's what he chose to do. Or should he use the opportunity to resign from his particular college, right? He's not a practicing clinician anyways, right? He earned his ticket, so good on him, right? But much like me, and being a member of the Institute for Chartered Accountants and formerly an Institute of Chartered Business Valuators, I also earned that. But there's a good example. In the Chartered Business Valuators, I just resigned from that membership because my career has nothing to do with what that membership is all about. And I didn't want to have to comply with the things that they need their members to comply with. Not that I'm doing anything wrong, but the submitting yourself to audits, submitting yourself to file reviews, the storage, the fees, all that sort of stuff, no relevance to my career whatsoever, right? Being a psychologist in Ontario no longer has any relevance to Jordan Peterson's career. He's not going to come back to being a practicing psychologist, a clinician in Ontario. That's not going to happen, right? So what does he even need this for? He could have just said, cool, I'm bowing out. And that would have been the end of that. So that would have been another choice. So he had two easy ways to get away from this thing quietly. Should he do that? Or as an energy monster, as an attention-seeking businessman, should he use this as an opportunity to gain more attention and to amplify a public battle with the big bad enemy, which is the woke mob, that objects to his tweets. To make this about free speech, wokeism, leftism, the government coming after him. If you amplify this battle, it becomes an attention-seeking exercise. He doesn't do any of the easy options because this is about attention and building brands for him. Okay? On the merits of the micro issue, Peterson's wrong, in my opinion. Right? This isn't about free speech. This is about protecting the reputation of the psychologists, and he's wrong about that. You can't be a professional and say those things with as much reach as Peterson has. You can't poke your finger in the eyes of your fellow professionals and expect that that's going to be okay. But this battle that he's undertaken from a business perspective is brilliant. The business framing of attention and coming from not being boring, from having a battle with the evil man, so to speak. It's a brilliant play from a guy who's brilliant at getting attention. And that's what it is. This has nothing to do with free speech. It has nothing to do with psychologists. And the lesson for us is he was able to take an attempt to cancel him in a certain area, a crisis, and turn that into something that's going to level up his brand pretty significantly. The second thing that we can think about here, because I started this attention-seeking discussion by saying if you have no downside, right? If you have enough substance, you have enough wealth, what are they going to do to you really? Well, I talk about all the time on this podcast about embracing change. To embracing change. If you want different results, that requires different actions. Different results require different actions. You need to change. In business strategy, you have to make choices. We need to do this instead of that. Our current strategy, even if you're successful, our current strategy has brought us to here, and now we've run out on the utility of that particular strategy. So now we need to change strategy. Is there any utility left for Jordan Peterson being a psychologist in Ontario? No, there's no utility for him left, given where his business and his brand is today. And so you need to change. You need to move on. You need to switch business strategies, right? Because this idea of, I always say balance is bullshit, something from my father, but this idea of balancing old strategy, new strategy forever, it's not going to work. Sometimes you just need to change. So there's no scenario where Peterson can become or continue to be a global sensation fighting DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and fighting woke activism, and still remain a member of a profession that has fully embraced the messages of the activists. You can't do both. You can't balance those things. At some point, it is inevitable that his career and brand is going to grow in one direction, and it's just going to increasingly cause problems with his old strategy of being a psychologist and a member of the college. Choice has to be made in the end. Does anyone care if Peterson is a psychologist? No. No one cares about that. Does he need the accreditation to gain trust in his messaging? In other words, when he was earlier in his career, earlier in his brand, earlier with the 12 Rules for Life and some of his YouTube content, which has generated so much wealth and so much good for certain segments of the population, he had authority, which is another rule of persuasion, is to have authority through his association with the College of Psychologists, right? You become a member of this thing, of the college, and now you're authoritative, right? So individuals who are authoritative, credible, and knowledgeable experts in their fields are more influential and persuasive than those who are not. Part of the reason for that authority and credibility are some of the core building blocks of trust. If you're trying to give me personal advice for a mental anguish that I'm going through, would I trust you more if you were a psychologist an unheard of psychologist than if you were an unheard of person who was not a psychologist. Obviously, his association of being a psychologist helped him build the trust, right? That is, authority is persuasive, and you can gain authority through association. Does Peterson still need that? Does he still need the college for authority? Of course not. I've already told you, he's a world-leading influencer, a world-leading intellectual in his domain. It's just as powerful for him to say, wow, I've had billions and billions of views on my YouTube. I've made all this money because I helped so many people. I've sold so many books. I have all these great comments. I used to be a practicing clinician in the area of psychology. Everybody would say, cool. It doesn't help him in that statement to say, I am a member of the College of Psychologists of Ontario. It doesn't help him at all. And so he has come to the point in his rise to stardom and domination of influence globally in his particular area. He's risen to the point where he needs to embrace change. And I would submit to you that he knows that the former strategy has zero utility, and the new strategy is to use that breakup to exit from being a practicing psychologist or a licensed psychologist to gain attention and to further build the brand. That's what's going on here. And so attention and change are the lessons for us coming out of this story. Attention and change are the lessons from us coming out of this somewhat interesting story. And I would ask you, is that what you thought coming into this podcast? I don't think so. I think you thought this was a massive battle for free speech, anti-wokeism versus wokeism versus the government, right? This epic battle. It has nothing to do with any of that. I've started reading a book with my young daughter called Reframe Your Brain by Scott Adams, another popular influencer in the area of psychology and persuasion. He's not a psychologist. He's a cartoonist, but a trained hypnotist, and has written many books, self-help books in a sense, on persuasion. And because of that, we talk in my house this week a lot about reframes. And reframes is a different way to look at it. So, for example, Jocko, I can't say this guy's name, Willink, I think, who is an influencer on a bunch of famous podcasts. I think he's a former Navy SEAL or Navy SEAL trainer. And so that's a popular area of self-motivation. And he says that he responds to adversity with a one-word response. Doesn't matter what it is. Every sense of adversity in your life, in your business that he faces, he responds with the word good. Not a typical frame of that situation. It's a reframe. Good. It's an opportunity to face a challenge. Good. It's an opportunity to find the lemonade in the lemon, so to speak. The idea there is that there's always some benefit we can find in adversity, which is true, by the way. I mean, most of my career is built on that. There's always something we can learn from whatever happens to us, no matter how bad it seems to be at the time. Also, the frame, I talk about this on our podcast a lot, the frame helps us focus away from fear, right? Because fear is the enemy. With fear, we're paralyzed. We can't act. We're just frozen, right? That's our natural response from fear, which just leads to a million other issues. We'll talk about more some other day. I've talked to those issues before on this podcast. But if you look at something that's a problem and say, good, now you can focus on action-oriented positivity, which is your only way out of the trouble, is to focus on action-oriented positivity. It's a very powerful reframe. One word, good. Oh my God, this terrible thing happened to me. Good. Let's see what we can do with that. So when you're faced with a regulatory attack from a college of psychologists and you're a clinical psychologist, one of your options could be panicked with fear, to be frozen. And I have to tell you, I think I've experienced that to some extent, when I was younger and had my first attack of this, I kind of freaked out internally. I don't want to give any kudos or ammunition to those who falsely accused me of things, because again, I came out of this whole process and everything was good. But when you're first faced with this sort of cancellation, clearly you're going to go, oh my God, like I worked for a decade to become proficient in this area, become an honored member of this profession. Time for me to freak out a little bit, which generates fear. I didn't say good, but what a powerful reframe. You say, good. What can I do to be action-oriented, to find the positive and to come out of this? So we could be paralyzed by fear, or we could use the crisis as an opportunity to level up, which is what Jordan Peterson is doing. You can gain a bunch more attention. He could solidify yourself as the anti-woke warrior, sell a bunch more stuff as that leader, shed antiquated strategies that have no more utility for you, like his membership in this college, and you could move on. That's my view. A few of you sent in questions on this, like, what do you think of the Jordan Peterson thing, knowing that I've talked about him before? Well, there is my answer. I think that the story has nothing to do with what everybody's talking about and everything to do with his brilliant business response, focus on attention and changing his business strategy. I think it's going to work well for him. I don't think that he'll be a continuing clinical psychologist. And if his ego, if he can let that go from his ego, because he worked hard for it, I assumed he worked very hard for it, and he built his career on that. But I think that's what he's doing. And I think I know those are the lessons for us in our business. Thank you for listening. This has been the Winning Momentum podcast, back for another season, and we will see you next week.